green? Green means go. Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order. This is the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments for the Thursday, May 16, 2019. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Director Williams?
Here.
Hart?
Here.
Hartman?
Here.
Adam?
Here.
Levanino? Toussaint? Rubacaba?
Here.
Mosby?
Here.
Kasdan?
Here.
Clark?
Here.
Murillo?
Here.
Sierra?
Here.
And Chair Patino.
Here. Would you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Public comment.
Chair Patino, we have one public comment. Mr. Scott Wins.
Okay.
Good morning. Scott Wins representing Cars Are Basic. On Earth Day weekend, we sent out every member of this board, as well as the City Council of Carpinteria, Goleta, and Santa Barbara, a kind of tongue-in-cheek missive, talking about transportation policies and how if it was applied only to one group in our society, it would be completely considered unjust. So we took on women. After all, women are the weaker sex. Women should not be allowed to drive their cars. Women should not be allowed to have parking places. Women should not, and I just kept going on it. Now, the person that approved this letter that we sent out to you was none other than a retired Air Force colonel. She has a combat ribbon from Vietnam, and she said, go after them. Because when you take the general policies that are being applied across the state and in the county of Santa Barbara that are aimed specifically at the working middle class and the working poor, and you narrow it down to one group, all of a sudden it doesn't seem so fair. I found it interesting that in the city of Santa Barbara, the Earth Day celebration, they had a car show. This is the third year they've had a car show. But wait a minute, cars are bad. We have to get rid of cars. We have to tax them out of existence. We have to build residents that don't have any parking space. We have to take on-street parking away. We have to take out lanes on the streets for bicycle paths that aren't being used. Bicycle Coalition in 2016 in the discussion before the city of Santa Barbara said specifically that their multi-year plan for safe routes to school and to generate more kids to ride bicycles had failed. What's going on? If I miss something, I think you're funding them for the same thing that they've already said has failed over multi-years. How does that work? It doesn't seem reasonable to me that you would do that. Then again, City of Santa Barbara, City of Carpinteria, the City of Goleta have all stated that they can't prove bulb outs make pedestrians safer. But you fund them, and they cost a minimum of $45,000 a corner. How can you waste millions of dollars over decades on something they can't prove works? You have to stop this type of policy. It is disingenuous, it costs the taxpayers, and it takes away capacity and earning capacity of the working middle class and poor.
Thank you. Moving on to the consent calendar. There was a correction. Okay, Mr. Director Williams.
Madam Chair, I need to recuse myself from item A, item I, sorry.
Thank you. And there was item M. Ms. Van Mullen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 4M is to approve a 3% performance-based salary increase effective June 1st, 2019 for the executive director. And the Brown Act was amended in 2017, and it requires, under Government Code Section 54953, that prior to taking final action in an open meeting, the legislative body shall hear a verbal report regarding this, a summary of the recommended salary and benefit package. So I just want the record to reflect that reading the item and this announcement constitutes the required report.
Thank you. And item F, Ms. Kern.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the board, we have a slight correction to the resolution included in amendment to the Federal Transportation Improvement Program. We refer to an old state transportation improvement program. It needs to be 2018, not 2016. This was corrected on the website. It's just a typographical error. So please let the record reflect the correction. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone wish to have an item pulled for discussion? Okay, none. Can I have a motion?
I'll move the consent calendar with the exception of item I.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar with the exception of item I. Any further discussion? Any public comment?
We have no public comment. No
None
public
in
comment.
Santa Maria? Okay. Okay. I didn't hear from Santa Maria? Okay. Okay.
I'm good.
She's good.
Okay. She's good. Okay. No further discussion. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Director Williams?
Aye.
Hart? Hartman? Adam? Rubalcaba?
Aye.
Mosby?
Aye.
Kasdan? Clark? Murillo?
Aye.
Sierra?
Aye.
And Chair Patino.
Aye.
Motion passes 11-0.
Item number 5, unmet transit needs.
We need to move
Need to
item
do
I.
5.
Oh, I'm
4I.
sorry. I'm really trying to get through this fast. Okay, item I,
Move item I.
motion, second. Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Director Hart? Hartman? Adam? Rubalcaba?
Aye.
Mosby? Kasdan? Clark? Murillo?
Aye.
Sierra?
Aye.
And Chair Patino.
Aye,
Motion passes 10-0.
thank you. Moving on to item number 5, unmet transit needs.
Item 5, 5A, adopt resolution 1916 approving the 2019 transit needs assessment findings for fiscal year 2019-20, or 5B, adopt resolution 1921 to accept the report describing the 2019 transit needs assessment process while acknowledging the Public Utilities Code section 99401.5. Findings are not required because none of the region's recipients will claim funding for a non-transit purpose.
Thank you. And Michael Becker will be making the report.
Yes, thank you, Chair Patino and board members. Here to continue, or the item was continued in April, so we're here to hopefully bring resolution to it. During the April meeting, the board chose to continue the item because we didn't want to the county had agreed to not use money for streets and roads purposes, the TDA. This process, we go through it, we have public hearings to collect public comment. We determine if those comments meet the board-approved definition of unmet transit need, and then further we do an analysis to see if they meet the criteria for if they're reasonable to meet or not. Through this year, we had 3 unmet transit needs through this process, and all were found to be not reasonable to meet. Therefore, we brought a resolution to the board for consideration that found that there were no unmet transit needs that were reasonable to meet. And that would be required if any of the claimants were going to use the Transit Development Act, or TDA funding, for streets and roads purposes. However, based on the board's direction, we're returning with the original resolution as an option, and we also developed a second resolution that just acknowledges that we went through the process and it does not make a finding. If the board chooses to approve the first resolution, even though no jurisdictions or TDA recipients have indicated they will use the funds for streets and roads purposes, they potentially could amend their claim for that purpose. However, if the board chooses to approve the second resolution, 1921, it would make it impossible for SBCAG to process any amended claim or initial claim that includes streets and roads funding. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Okay. Hearing none. Is there any public comment?
There's no public comment.
Okay. Okay. Director Hart.
Sorry, I'll slow us down a little bit. Just can you highlight the differences between the two resolutions, 1916 and 1921?
Sure, Director Hart. The 1916 is the same as the resolution. The only thing that's been updated is the date that we brought in April. And that is what we bring every year, or every year that we have found since 2005 that there have been no unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet. It says that we went through the process, followed the law, and we determined that there are no unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet. That satisfies Caltrans requirements if there are any jurisdictions that desire to use the TDA money for streets and roads purposes. The second resolution just acknowledges that we went through the process this year. We held public hearings. We noticed the meetings and so forth. However, because we are not expecting any claims to include streets and roads funding, we are not making a finding.
Thank you. Director Williams?
I'll move option B. It's not, option A is no longer necessary. And I'm sorry that the county was the last jurisdiction to engage in this practice, and it's more truthful, more honest, and deals with an outdated state law in a more productive fashion.
I just had a question before
Okay, I have a motion and a second, and we'll discussion. Go ahead.
just, are there any implications? I mean, I know this, I realize I'm getting this in midstream, but are there any consequences between the two? Is it indeed, it's an outdated state law, so it doesn't really matter in a way which one of these we choose? Is one simply more accurate?
Director Kasdan, as long as there's no jurisdictions that intend to use TDA funding for streets and roads purposes, either resolution is fine. Really, the difference is whether SBCAG could process a claim for streets and roads purposes or not. And both satisfy Caltrans requirements. We did, between April and today, we did confer with Caltrans Division of Mass Transit to see if the second resolution meets their muster, and it does.
And there are none of these claims that you're referring to right now?
No.
So they're, between the two, it's 6 1/2 dozen of the other?
Right. Initially, we believed that the county was going to submit a claim to include streets and roads funding. However, based on discussions, we've learned that they've changed course and they're not going to claim for streets and roads purposes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Director Adam?
I'm wanting to hear from Public Works here. I see Ms. Wells in the back of the room here. And I'm wanting to hear from Public Works that, because it's my understanding that we usually use unmet needs money for transportation, for roads. So, sorry. Oh, Brittany, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Director Adam and Chair Patino, we have in the past spent a small amount of money on local streets and roads. It did not go to pavement. It was generally used for associated, like hardscape and things like that. So it was $100,000. It was a pretty small amount. We are no longer going to be doing that.
Well, I've been engaged in a pretty brutal fight to get you money so that you could do whatever, and so $100,000 to me.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you don't care about it, but
We certainly care about it.
Yeah.
I think being a partner with the other agencies and providing transit and helping out some of the agencies that provide regional service to county residents, I think is a priority. And so we've been working with them collaboratively, and I think it's, at this point, this is the right thing to do.
okay, so you actually support the one that does not allow TDA funds to be used for non-transit purposes?
I think at this point in 2019, I think we do. it's the right thing to do.
Director Mosby? Was it, no? Oh, I'm sorry.
Madam Chair,
Ms.
members
Curran?
of the board, I just want to clarify the question if there are any repercussions. If a city or a county decided that they could not spend all their money on transit, they couldn't amend their claim and then decide to use it for streets and roads if you adopt Resolution B. We'd have to come back to the board and make a new finding that there were no unmet needs and prior to that claim being processed. So I just want to clarify that there are repercussions, that you may not have the flexibility to spend this money on streets and roads if the opportunity arises. And Michael said that earlier, but I just want to reemphasize that. Thank you.
Okay, Director Hart?
Yeah, just to make that even more clear, so we're saying that none of the local jurisdictions plan to use this money for streets and roads now. That's what they have identified, actually. And we're saying with the passage of this resolution that that administrative path will be closed, but if circumstances were to change, they would find themselves in a position needing to do that. They could file a claim, and we could have a process to readdress this resolution at that point in time and create a path and fix that at that point. Is that right?
We would have to come back to this board, and we'd have to make the finding that that's before you today, that there are no unmet needs that are reasonable to meet at that time.
Right.
Yes, so we could do that.
So really what we're doing here is we're trying to transition from the past where
Correct.
we did this to the future where we'd prefer not to do this, and there is probably some uncertainty this year about this. I think this is setting the tone to move forward without preventing us from having to go backwards if circumstances change. So to me, this works, but I can understand how other folks might have a different view.
Did you? Oh, Director Adam?
Yeah, I'm just not going to be able to support this because I just think it unnecessarily constrains the decision-making process at the staff level, and I don't like it.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Rubalcaba?
Yes, so are we talking about if we do option B, then it will constrain the ability, I want more clarity, for staff to do anything with the money that's remaining?
Mr. Becker?
Yeah, Director Rubalcaba, historically, over the last couple of years, it's only been the County of Santa Barbara that has been using TDA funds for streets and roads purposes. If you go back a couple of years, there were more jurisdictions, Santa Maria, Lompoc. However, over probably the last 4 or 5 years, it's only been the County of Santa Barbara. Every other jurisdiction in the region uses all of their TDA funds for transit purposes. And like Director Kern said, the only implication is SBCAG would not be able to approve an amended claim that includes streets and roads. However, we can ask the board to revisit the finding at a later date if necessary. But at this point, if by going with option B, it would constrain SBCAG. SBCAG at the staff level would not be able to honor or to process an amended claim that included streets and roads purposes.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Okay, any further discussion?
I just think this
Okay.
would be a fitting whimperish end to a 20-year struggle of jurisdictions deciding to take the right course and spend transit money on transit on the purpose that TDA was meant for, instead of diverting it for other purposes. And to their credit, all cities in this jurisdiction have already done that. The county was the last one that was still doing, not doing that, only by $100,000, but it's best to put it to bed and let's use transit money for transit. Because there's needs, even though they don't fit the precise definition of the statute, those needs are there. We have needs in Clean Air Express, we have demand, and the whole definition of making a finding that there's no unmet transit needs that are feasible to be met, I think defies the way that our constituents look at the world, which go, hey, there's something, Clean Air Express, that we could use, that there's demand for, that we could pay for, but we're still making this finding that there's no unmet transit needs that are feasible to be met.
Director Adam?
Well, I'm just going to say that you could take the money. I mean, there's lots of people in my district who watch the empty buses go up and down and up and down and up and down the street. And you could probably, if you were to look at the individual route ridership, which I've asked for many times and never been able to get, you could probably get enough money to do whatever you wanted to do with respect to Clean Air Express if you just reallocated some of the dollars. It doesn't necessarily follow that if you put the transportation money into transportation that you're not just wasting more money on buses, empty buses going up and down the street and up and down the street and up and down the street. So that's what people in my district see constantly, and maybe in your district it works better and that's fine, but the obscene waste that we see in the North County is it's dramatic and it's preventable, and we should redirect the resources to the places that it will do good instead of just confining it to whatever we're doing now.
I have to sort of piggyback on that up in North County, because we do see a lot of empty buses, and we're not the same as South County. And we didn't even have people come to our open meetings and to testify that there were any unmet transit needs, so I won't be supporting that either. Any other comments from the dais? Okay.
Well,
Yes.
I just respond to that by saying that when we discussed this the same day, our director articulated a need that was for North County folks to have an additional Clean Air Express, which is a highly subscribed service. It helps constituents that live in North County cities, but it also helps the county because many of them are county employees. And so there was a clear outstanding need, and that's why I thought it was ironic that we were about to say that there's no unmet needs that are feasible to be met when right after our director just gave a report on one need that was feasible to be met. So I hope we can put this long fight to bed because it's no longer about a lot of money.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from the dais? Okay. Hearing none, Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Director Williams?
Aye.
Hart? Aye. Hartman? Aye. Adam?
No.
Toussaint? No. Rubalcaba?
Aye.
Mosby?
Aye.
Kasdan? Aye. Clark? Aye. Murillo?
Aye.
Sierra?
Aye.
And Chair Patino.
No.
Motion passes 9-3.
Moving on to item number 6.
Item 6, Draft Measure A Program of Projects. Hold public hearing to review and comment on Draft Measure A Program of Projects for fiscal years 2019-20 to 2023-24.
Okay. Do I have a staff member that's going to, because I don't have that down on the,
Jackie Matta.
okay. Jackie?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and Directors. My name is Jackie Mata, and I'm a Transportation Planner for SBCAG. Today, I will be presenting the Draft Measure A Program of Projects for the next 5 fiscal years, which are 19-20 through 23-24. The Program of Projects shows how every dollar of Measure A funding will be spent by SBCAG, local agencies, and transit operators for the next 5 years. For today's presentation, I will simply be highlighting some of the projects that are included in the Program of Projects. The Measure A Program of Projects consists of the local Program of Projects developed by local agencies, and these are any local street and transportation improvements. And it also consists of the Authority Program of Projects developed by SBCAG and Santa Barbara MTD, And these are named projects identified in the Measure A investment plan. So some background, Measure A was approved by voters in Santa Barbara County in 2008 with 79% approval. The measure will generate approximately $1.05 billion in revenue over the 30-year period. But for this program of projects, we're only looking at the 5-year period. During this time, we will have about $38 million available for allocation in fiscal year 1920, and then $180 million available over the next 5-year period. Of that amount, 64% goes to local agencies as local pass-through, and the remaining 36% is used by SBCAG and Santa Barbara MTD for regional projects. So in terms of local investment, as you can see from this pie chart, approximately 57% of the local pass-through funds are being utilized for streets and roads investment. The second highest is for alternative transportation investments, and that's 17%. And then the other major investments are for safety, urban forestry, and traffic signals. One investment included in the regional program is for specialized transit. Approximately $1.8 million is going to be invested for specialized transit for our transit operators. An example of this is in the North County is Smooth, which is a great transit service for elderly and disabled. And then another investment is the US 101 project, which is one of our named projects on the authority program of projects. And so this is one great thing about Measure A is that it has provided us with a match, and we have competed very well in our competitive grants for SB1 Cycle 1. And this has helped us fund segments 4A through 4C of the US 101 HOV. So this concludes my presentation. I hope this gave you a good overview of how we're using Measure A on the local level and the regional level. I also want to mention that the draft program projects was presented to TTAC, the Technical Transportation Advisory Committee, and there were no comments received. So today we're holding a public hearing for feedback, and next month we will present the final program of projects to your board for approval.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? Hearing none. Any public comment?
There's no public comment.
Any comments from the dais? Nothing? Well, hearing none, no motion is required for this. It's just comments. Thank you. Moving on to item 7.
Item 7, Measure A Citizens Oversight Committee. Receive a report on the status of the at-large member recruitment effort for the Measure A Citizens Oversight Committee and provide direction to staff on the selection.
Honorable Chair Patino, Vice Chair Hart, board members. For the record, my name is Lauren Bianchi-Clemen, Government Affairs and Public Information Manager. The item before you today is on the recruitment process for an at-large position vacancy on the Measure A Citizens Oversight Committee. As you know, the Citizens Oversight Committee is comprised of 11-member committee appointed by your board. 4 members are nominated by the North County Subregional Planning Committee, 4 from the South Coast Subregional Planning Committee, 3 members are at large. As outlined in the ordinance, the Citizen Oversight Committee is tasked with ensuring accountability to voters in regard to expenditure of funds, Measure A funds. They meet 1 to 2 times a year and annually report to your board. The recommendation for you today and for your discussion is consistent with the 2009 selection process of at-large members. That is to 1, widely advertise the volunteer position, and 2, that's SBCAG appoint a 3-member ad hoc committee that consists of the SBCAG chair and the 2 sub-regional committee chairs. The ad hoc committee would be tasked to meet once and to review the received applications and nominate a candidate to fill the vacancy. We hope to begin the recruitment starting today until June 7th, and pending schedule availability of the ad hoc committee, we're proposing to meet at the next sub-regional meeting scheduled on June 12th, with a potential appointment before the board on June 20th. And that concludes my presentation.
Any questions of Ms. Clemen? Hearing none, then we just give you direction, and is that appropriate? Oh, I'm sorry. Director Hartman.
So we have 3 at-large members, and we want geographic representation among other things. So where do so we're just choosing one of the 3 at-large. So where do the 2 who are currently on the advisory committee, where are they from?
Yeah, the member Hamid is actually from Costa Mesa, represented by, he resides in Costa Mesa, but he serves AAA. So he covers this entire region up to San Luis Obispo, and was an active member and part of the Measure A initiative initially in 2008. And we actually haven't filled a position of an at-large yet in 10 years.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments? Hearing none, I guess we'll just go ahead and we'll get to the Ad Hoc Committee, we'll get together, and then we'll come up with something by June 20th.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you. Moving on to item 8.
Item 8, Highway 101 HOV Carpinteria to Santa Barbara. Receive an update on the Highway 101 Carpinteria to Santa Barbara project.
The library item.
Library.
Library item.
Pardon me.
Anyway, we know that people are awake. Okay, all right, the library presentation.
Receive a presentation from the County of Santa Barbara regarding library services.
Good morning, Madam Chair. My name is George Chapton, for the record, Director of Community Services for the county. And libraries are one of the things under my purview. To my right is Natasha Garduno, who's an executive assistant, and Ryder Bailey, who's our CFO. Ryder has been doing most of the heavy lifting for the library issues, so I'm going to turn it over to Ryder for the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder. Oh, Mr. Bailey.
Thank you, George. And good morning, directors. Thank you for having me here today. Today I will be presenting an update on the countywide library system. I will begin with a brief overview of the system, identify key challenges, update you with some of the work of our Library Ad Hoc Committee, break out how our libraries are funded, call out remaining deficits, and share a proposed cost-sharing plan to address those deficits. Our system is comprised of 14 libraries broken out into 4 library zones. Each zone has its own color on this map, with the main municipal libraries underlined in red. Of those 14, 5 are city municipal libraries. Then there are 9 county branch libraries. Some are located within city limits, Carpinteria, Solvang, Buellton, and Guadalupe, and others are located within unincorporated areas, Montecito, Vandenberg, Cuyama, Los Alamos, and Orcutt. The total operating budget for the system is roughly $13.5 million, with the cities and the county making up approximately 87% of that funding. Our libraries have been working to categorize the various system libraries. Ultimately, this will help the Ad Hoc Committee define basic services by category. This table has all the county library locations, from satellite reading rooms to bookmobile, small branches 1 and 2, medium, and the main libraries. Hours, staffing, services, and programming vary by location. The 4 main libraries support, administer, and enhance the smaller branch libraries. So what is driving our challenges? While there are many service delivery models throughout the state, our partnership and reliance on city libraries to administer library services to smaller communities in an effort to maximize local resources is unique. We're also different in that, unlike many other library systems throughout the state, we do not have dedicated source of funding for libraries, aside from Measure L, which services the Goleta Library. This means that most of the system's funding comes from counties and cities' discretionary revenues. The result of this is that libraries have to compete with all the other service needs and priorities in the cities and the county. California State has eliminated funding for local libraries, putting pressure on counties and cities. Library reserves are depleted, and we can no longer rely on branch reserves to balance their budgets. In the past few years, our libraries have been reliant on one-time funding as a stopgap measure to prevent closures. So what's next? The goal of the ad hoc committee, which is made up of 4 library directors, 2 county supervisors, a library advisory committee member, and a Friends group member, will be to provide both a short-term funding recommendation, which I'll get into in a later slide, as well as identify a path to long-term fiscal sustainability. This future work could include benchmarking, governance models, dedicated revenue, public-private partnership, and facility needs. Key challenges include increasing staff, Black Gold, and other expenses. Black Gold is the platform that allows for book and resource sharing across our library system, which stretches from San Luis Obispo to Santa Paula. Our library directors have been cutting expenses in recent years, and reserves have been tapped. Library directors have addressed recent budgetary shortfalls by cutting expenses that don't directly impact patrons, cutting services, hours, and days that impact the fewest people. They're stretching main library programming to serve smaller branches, and with a priority to preserve youth services. We are now at a point where there isn't anywhere else to reduce aside from fewer open hours and potential closures. While still a work in progress, our ad hoc committee has agreed on the following proposed guiding principles for our library system: that all residents deserve access to basic library services, and that basic library service levels vary by branch category. Equity requires consideration beyond population. However, population-based funding should not be redistributed to address those needs. Core operations should be funded by public revenue sources, while friends, foundations, volunteers, grants, public-private partnerships should be activated for expanded services. Libraries should have secure and sufficient resources to meet the community's needs. Support services provided by main libraries add value to the branches. That library directors need flexibility in how they provide basic and expanded services. And that increased collaboration and coordination has system-wide benefits. So here's how our libraries are funded. And I believe I just passed out a more recent copy of this, had a minor change to the city of Goleta. So I'll start by walking through this chart. The libraries have been sorted by zone. The next column identifies who provides the library's location. In 2 instances, Guadalupe and Orcutt, those libraries pay rent. The next column is county funding provided. Then city funding, sales tax, Measure L, special tax assessment for the Goleta Library. Other revenue are things such as fines, fees, copy fees, room rentals, etc. The community column includes grants, foundations, friends, and other donations. The furthest column to the right is the 1920 budget gap. For the main municipal libraries, Santa Barbara City has made cost reductions to close their gap, and Santa Maria City is expected to rely upon salary savings to close theirs. The Library Ad Hoc Committee has been tasked with coming up with a plan to address the county branch library deficits. If you're a visual person, here is that information visually displayed. As noted earlier, most of the funding is either light blue, which is the cities, or dark blue, which is the counties. On this slide, we've highlighted service population and funding per capita by branch. The third column, base funding per capita, is basically composed of county, city, and tax funding. The next column is base funding per capita and community contributions. You'll note for some branches, such as Montecito, Carpinteria, and Los Alamos, this is a significant portion of their funding. Lastly, the far right column is the projected budget per capita. I'd like you to note that the state average is roughly $38, and only one of our libraries exceeds that. If you were to exclude that one library, the rest of our system is funded at roughly half the state average, at $23 per capita. Okay, now here are the latest deficits and the ad hoc committee's proposed cost-sharing funding plan. The ad hoc committee has reviewed multiple options and had lengthy discussions to address the funding shortfalls. The model recommended here is to fully fund the 2 smallest branch libraries, and then a cost-sharing plan for branches within cities at a 1-to-1 cost ratio, and in unincorporated areas, 2-to-1, since they do not have cities to look to for support. The second column is the structural imbalance for our 9 county branch libraries. It's approximately $325,000. This does not include the city municipal libraries. The cost of this plan is in the next column. It's roughly $250,000. And I will be seeking funding during our upcoming budget hearings on June 11th and 13th for that funding. I will add, we currently have roughly half of that funding within our operating budget. This leaves an unfunded amount of $116,000 in the furthest column to the right. I have had discussions with the Goleta staff, and I believe Solvang is prepared to match the county at $31,000 each, leaving only Guadalupe City as a city with a gap. For unincorporated branches, Montecito, Vandenberg, and Orcutt, they still have gaps in this proposal, and we'll be looking towards those communities, specifically the Friends groups, to help us close those gaps. I'd like to thank you all for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. My contact information is on this slide, so if you have any questions in the future, please reach out to me. I'll be happy to help.
Any questions of Mr. Bailey? Director
Yes.
Clark?
Thank you. I have a question about the, I believe it's a bar chart comparing county versus city expenses. Thank you. And I'm from Carpinteria, but this may apply to other jurisdictions as well. The gold part of the bar, I believe, is the city sales tax, which should properly be lumped into city funding. It's a city tax measure, applies to the city only. And so I think it's maybe this is a moot point, but the bar chart looks inherently unfair if that gold part is not actually dark blue. Thank you.
Well, I'll just say, for purposes of essentially the match that the ad hoc committee is proposing to provide from the county, we would, of course, count that as city funding. For the purposes of comparing and looking at system sustainability, that's the reason why I think this bar chart is the way it is, because it is the jurisdictions that are making some sort of significant investment of either their general fund or even, in better case, a dedicated revenue source are even more sustainable. And so, you look at those bar charts and you look at the amount that is put in by some of the cities, and those are also libraries that are more financially sustainable. But there are some of us that truly believe that the only way to reach the gold standard is basically to do what Goleta has done, which is to have some sort of dedicated revenue source for libraries for a given geographic area. And potentially that has already happened in Carpinteria, and why so many people campaigned for the sales tax last time around, even though it's a general tax.
Director Sierra?
Well, I've got I'm a little scattered here. First of all, I wanted to thank Santa Barbara for taking care of Yulton and Solvang for the last few years, and let Goleta know how excited we are to be under their umbrella. Libraries are so important, and they keep getting more and more expensive. I truly appreciate the proposed match. It's hard for me to go to my council every couple years and tell them that we need to keep bumping up the increase in our budget for libraries. And we appreciate everything the county has done. Our library is really important to our community. Our friends are trying to get more involved to help with the cost too. So thank you very much.
Any public comments?
I have some comments.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Rubalcaba?
Yes. I want to echo the same thing, as that our library is very important to us as well. And I'm not sure where the information came from. I don't have any copies of what everybody got to look at over there. I'd like to have copies of that at some point, because when it shows that Guadalupe City, there's no city funding, is that just based on 2019-20? Because I know that we have put some funds towards the library. So just wondering where that came from. And it is very important to us to keep our library, and we're working on that and trying to figure out how to do that.
Director, through the chair, I could answer that. Is based on 1920's budget. There is currently no funding from the city of City of Guadalupe for their library.
Thank you.
Now, if there's been a recent action by the city, that would be great news, because we've been worried, and Guadalupe has been one of the libraries on a high deficit amount. Maybe you could highlight those: Orchid, Montecito, Guadalupe. What are the other ones that are in a large deficit?
Just one moment. Director Williams, through the chair, if you go to slide 11, you'll have all the remaining deficits. Projected, of course, assuming that the Board of Supervisors is amenable to our cost-sharing plan. The largest is for the unincorporated Montecito at 44, nearly 45,000. I believe I spoke on Solvang's 31.5. So that would leave the village at 11,000, Guadalupe at roughly 16,000, assuming that the county matches the 16, and then 12,000 for Orchid. So not incredibly large balances, but still significant to their individual budgets.
And that's assuming people
I'd
do
like
the
to
match.
add-
Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, I was just saying I'd like to add that, again, that any help that can come our way would be appreciated, because we are doing our best to find ways to figure out how to keep our library funded. We do have a project down at our Leeway Park that's going to be happening within the next couple of years, and we are hoping to place the library in that community center so that we don't have to worry about paying for rent anywhere else. But that's a couple years, 3 years down the road or so. But until then, anything will be very helpful and appreciated.
And just to answer director's question, the information does come from the library director from Santa Maria, who oversees your library, the Guadalupe Library. And I think what we didn't let you know is that the ad hoc committee is comprised of two board members, Supervisor Hartman and Supervisor Williams, and the four directors, the library directors, and two members from the Friends and Library Advisory Committee. So that's how we're compiling all the information as well.
Thank you. Director Hartman?
First a question, then a comment. Did our recommended proposal have special accommodations for the two libraries that have to pay rent, Orchid and Guadalupe?
Director Hartman, through the chair, no. There was one of the funding models that was discussed was to pay for rents, but ultimately the one that was recommended did not.
And then I have heard that a generous donor in Guadalupe has contributed to the rent of the library there, and that was going to be matched by the lessor. And if that's the case, we have a matching policy for donations from the county, so that may help Guadalupe significantly.
Thank you. Director Hart?
Yeah, I appreciate the work of the subcommittee, but this is the first time that I think the other board members have seen this. So want to reserve judgment for that budget hearing discussion about that, and really want to urge the cities that are in a financially strong position to, fully fund their libraries with the full gap. I don't think it's really, I think there are different cross subsidies here proposed in this this plan that create some inequities in my mind, and I'd really just urge those cities that are have strong financial reserves and have a library funding gap to be looking carefully at their own reserves to fund their library, rather than looking to the county for assistance, because there are many communities in the county that don't have those reserves, don't have that funding opportunity, don't have that choice, and I think that that has to be something that we consider when we're making these decisions about funding.
Director Hartman?
Thank you, Director Hart. Director Hart, thank you for saying that, because I definitely would be helpful for those of us here in Guadalupe. And Director Hartman, you are correct. We did have some donations towards us, so maybe that's something that we can look into, have that matching.
Director Hartman?
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of put this in a bigger context, if I could. The way this has worked, this is simply informational, and the ad hoc committee thought that it would be a good idea for the electeds from each jurisdiction to have an opportunity to hear directly from staff to the ad hoc committee about this. So we heard the same information, and it wasn't the burden of the library administrators in the different cities to have to try to explain this. So it is an unusual, it isn't within SBCAG's authorities. However, we did have a training suggesting that for informational items that affect all of us, this might be a forum where we could indeed discuss, not make any decisions. So each of us obviously has to go back to our own jurisdiction and take this information and discuss it in light of our different budgets. But it is an opportunity because we are thinking about our county library framework. We all are part of that, and we don't really have an opportunity for all of us who are ultimately decision makers to consider what the options are. So we took our best crack at it for this budget season because I've been here for 2 years and now coming on the third, and libraries tend to be the most contentious thing at the county, and so we wanted to get everybody ahead of time and talk about that. But this is only for this budget season, and then we're thinking into the future what more we can do. So please weigh in with your library administrators and tell them, you know, your thoughts about how we can do this as well, and maybe we would come back again when we have a bigger, longer term, or have a special workshop or something. But thank you to SBCAG for allowing us, because I think this is an advantage to be able to share this information together, and thank you to our CSD for taking this on.
Thank you. Director Williams?
Well, I wanted to say partially because I suppose it's partially my fault. It's been so contentious for the last couple of years that the reason why the pot has been stirred significantly is because libraries, especially the small libraries, were dying on the vine, right? And that since it's a partnership between multiple jurisdictions and friends groups, it takes a certain amount of highlighting the issue and the partnership between the cities and the counties and the friends groups. And it's important to understand this slide. This column is the current deficits. So the current deficits are significant. That smaller column assumes that, number one, that the ad hoc committee has their proposal for the county to match in a certain way city and friends contributions in a 1-for-1 basis to cities and in a 2-for-1 basis to friends groups for those libraries that don't have a city. And then the last column, there's still a remaining gap to deal with, even assuming we all step up and put more money. So this is a significant issue. What this doesn't include also is that Lompoc and Santa Maria also have significant deficits. So what started off as a problem to try to ensure small library sustainability has now become, because of just the lack of sustainable funding, something that's affecting even the large libraries that we once believed had a secure future. I just wanted to make sure that people understood this is, the column to the right looks manageable, but that's the column that assumes that the county and each city split the remaining the deficit, or in the case of an unincorporated library like Orchid or Montecito, that we would match with a friends group.
Thank you. Director Murillo?
Thank you, Director Williams, for taking responsibility for stirring the pot. And I think that we're all trying to go forward with our absolute love of libraries and our support for that source, you know, for everyone, our children, homeless, our elderly. Okay. So this ad hoc committee, Mr. Bailey, was a county government-based committee, so there wasn't a representative from the city of Santa Barbara there?
Director Barrio, through the chair, the library director, which is an employee of the Santa Barbara City, was on this committee.
Okay.
And is on the committee.
And so it was focused on this fiscal budget, this year's fiscal year, is that right?
Director, through the chair, that was one of the components covered by the ad hoc committee, yes, this budget cycle and future budget cycles.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any public comment?
I have no public comment speakers.
Okay, so we are receiving the presentation, and so therefore there's no motion to be made.
Thank you.
Oh.
Madam Chair, we have one public comment, Ms. Gabby Edwards.
Thank you.
Madam Chair and Directors, hi, I'm Gabby Edwards. I represent Carpinteria on the Library Advisory Committee, and I'm chair of the Friends in Carpinteria. Short-term comments, and we are hugely grateful in Carpinteria that in the last couple of years, when we had deficits, the supervisors gave us some emergency funds that kept our doors open, and we're grateful for that. Now we're to our Carpinteria because, as you know, we passed, and though it goes into the general fund, that added sales tax revenue, we're confident that we're going to get just all we need is a sliver of it, but it's going to make a huge difference, as you know, in the future of our library. My request today is that you are as generous with Montecito. They aren't represented today, but they're, as you know, the only remaining branch with us in Zone 1. And it's been hard for us in Zone 1 in recent years for a couple of reasons to raise private funds. I mean, it all looks to us like, gosh, why can't Montecito folks just write a couple of big checks? It's not that easy when budgets have climbed so, and it's hard to know why, number one. And number two, the role of libraries is changing all over our country, and it's not clear to donors, where it's going, So that's been a difficult time for Montecito for those reasons, I think. In the long term, I mean, I don't know how you're going to fund it. I thought it was going to be all those, cannabis dollars, but it feels to me like what we need in our county is a library services department. Small, lean, professionals. We need that leadership. It would help all of us. One of the things that we learned in a wonderful all-day workshop that the Central Library in Santa Barbara held for all of our friends groups is that our job is not the operating budget. We shouldn't be even begging at these meetings. Our job is to raise money to fund new programs, to address way deferred maintenance of our buildings, and that's what we want to be doing. I think we can't do it without some county leadership that says, this is the future of libraries, this is the vision, and that we can take that on the road and start raising money. Obviously, Director Chapchian has way too much on his plate. We need a separate library services department, so just think about that. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, this is a presentation and no motion is required. Okay, moving on to item number. Yes.
Madam Chair, just because one sort of comment was dropped by the speaker is that's where this matching money is coming from. It's cannabis tax. I mean that the positive development in the county's general fund has been cannabis tax. So, any of the libraries that are taking any of this money in the last 2 years, that's where it's coming from. So, the increased funding. So that's just a reality of what's rescuing our libraries, at least from the county side.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 9.
Okay, now we can do item 9. Highway 101 HUV Carpinteria to Santa Barbara. Receive an update on the Highway 101 Carpinteria to Santa Barbara project.
And Mr. Fred Luna will be giving the presentation. I was looking for him all over this.
Thank you, Madam Chair and directors. So we want to take this opportunity to give this board an update on the Highway 101 project, and we appreciate the board approving several agreements that were on the consent calendar today that help move the project forward today. Okay, so how do I do this? Next. This is going to be awkward. So today I want to cover three main points. First, I want to give you an update on our Phase 3 project, the Linda Casitas project down in Carpinteria. Then I wanted to give you an update on the Highway 101 corridor. And we're at a unique point right now on Highway 101 where we have broken up the project into 5 segments, as you know, and every segment has some progress going on right now, so we're very busy. And then on Highway 101, I just wanted to outline some next steps that would be coming to the board as far as agreements and milestones that will be happening in the next several months. And I know there's a better way to do that. So you're getting a preview here of later this month, we're going to be releasing our 3rd construction brochure. This is the cover for the Carpinteria project at Linda Casitas. And we're also going to be doing a preview on segment 4A in the city of Carpinteria, which, as you know, is the first segment that will be going to construction next summer. And quite a bit of progress has been made since last November when I last gave an update to this board. We've completed work in Carpinteria Creek. We continue work on the overcrossings at Linden and Casitas Pass, and the sound wall construction has been underway for a while, and now you're seeing the visible elements of that as they're putting the block walls on that. The schedule for completion is still about a year from today, in the spring of 2020. And then we've also, through the board's approval, included some early Phase 4A work into that contract via change order and the use of Measure A funds. And the landscaping contract will start later this year. So that means that as there's an overlap and we're finishing the highway project, we'll be able to start implementing and installing the plants. And when we do have our ribbon cutting event next year, there'll be plants in the ground. So this was since last November. This was when we celebrated the opening of the northbound on-ramp at Casitas Pass. You see some familiar faces there. Executive Director Kern, Fred Shaw from the Carpinteria, then staff member Hart, and now Director, and Director Williams. So this is an important link because it improves access to northbound Highway 101 by providing extra separation between the Linden ramps and those at Casitas Pass. And it will also connect to the new frontage road that's being built at Villarreal. And here was the first ride when we opened that. Director Williams driving. He got to celebrate that by... Also in December, we had another mini opening event to commemorate or celebrate the opening of the Carp Creek bike path, which had been closed for a number of months. And this is a vital connection in the city of Carpinteria that connects inland to the coastal areas. It was previously only able to be accessed during dry weather. Now it's an all-weather crossing with better access points, and we had a candy cane trail event because it was right before Christmas, so it was a nice event to get the community out there and celebrate that opening. I talked about the sound walls. This is further up near Napomo Drive. This is an area where people have been desiring a sound wall for about 50 years. And so finally a sound wall is getting built and as part of this project. So I was just going to transition into Highway 101 main improvements. And so I showed this slide, and everybody's seen this before, last November, that we were able and we were successful in funding the first 3 segments for A, B, and C, $184 million in SB1 funding, coupled with a similar amount of SHOP funding from Caltrans, and then, as was mentioned earlier, using our Measure A money to leverage that. That funding package included all the 101 improvements in those segments, plus some coastal access projects. And our plan at that time was to start construction in 2020 for the first segment in Carpinteria, and then the next two in 2021. And so this table right here just gives you an indication of how we're performing on that promise that we made to the Transportation Commission. So these are some key milestones on the left, and then the first three segments has a column for each. The milestones in bold and italics have mean they completed, and then the rest are the anticipated dates. So we're on schedule is the general takeaway from this. But in segment 4C, we're actually ahead of schedule, and so an opportunity had arose to try to deliver that project earlier. The design has advanced quite a bit, and so we can actually deliver segment 4C in an earlier fiscal year by several months. And so we're working towards that to actually get that out to construction in late 2020. And then segment 4B in 2021, the work will be underway in all three segments for a period of time. So that's our kind of our primary focus right now as we're working through coastal permitting. We did get the coastal permit from the City of Carpinteria in segment 4A. That happened in April 2019. And then we're working with county staff for segments B and C on the coastal permits, which the timeline currently anticipates that being complete in early next year. Down at the bottom, it just shows that who's leading those efforts as far as the design. So Caltrans is leading the effort in segments 4A and B, and then SBCAG through consultants is leading the effort in segment 4C. So I wanted to mention, this is kind of the preview, over the next several months you'll be seeing a number of agreements in order to maintain progress and keep things moving. We have multiple number of relationships and contracts that need to be either implemented or amended going forward. Some of those are agreements with Caltrans to perform work on the state highway system, SBCAG as a consultant, using consultants rather. And so we actually have several design and right-of-way cooperative agreements in place that outline the funding. Those have been completed, so those are shown in italics and in bold at the very top. Also, to implement the coastal access improvements, we've entered into MOUs. Those were on the agenda earlier today with the County of Santa Barbara for some of those projects in segments B and C, and then ongoing work to continue to make progress on those parallel projects in segments 4D and E. We will be working with Caltrans to develop cooperative agreements for the construction as the time nears and we get closer to that. And one of the big components will be developing a transportation management program for that to ensure that we're keeping the work zone safe, and we're providing opportunities and programs to reduce the number of vehicles that travel through the corridor. And then down on the bottom, those rows that are shown in the shading and kind of the brown text are different consultant agreements that SBCAG will be bringing to this board over the next several months. That includes design agreements with our designer that's been working on the segment 4C, and we would like them to get started on the segments 4D and E in the last segment of Montecito in the county, and then the City of Santa Barbara. And then other specialists that are needed to help complement the design, including continuing work with utilities and the railroad, traffic. We have a consultant that's been assisting with all the coastal permitting, and our public information for across the whole corridor. So like I mentioned, this month there were several agreements on the board. One of those that should not be not go unmentioned is maintaining the presence of our corridor advisor, Tony Harris. He will continue to help us with our coordination with the Federal Highways Administration as we ready the projects for construction. And then coming up in June and July, and then some of the months through the summer as we have board meetings, as I mentioned, some of the specialists that were continuing to support the work on the 101 project. So I want to take this opportunity to talk a little bit. I mentioned it in November, the use of construction manager, general contractor, alternative delivery method. This was something that Caltrans had approved about a year ago to undertake this process. This allows the team, Caltrans and SBCAG, to bring a contractor on board early, and you get the ability to leverage their expertise as construction experts early in the project and ask questions. They sit down with your design teams, and you're able to work through issues. Granite was selected as the construction manager, general contractor, and they began work in January, and they have they've set up shop with Mr. Eads' house in San Luis Obispo, so they're there about once a week asking questions and working through the projects. And some of the benefits is that we're able to identify and minimize risks early on, get the contractor involved early, in fact, actually look at particular elements of the project that can be accelerated and delivered early. And then you're able to hone in on a price that's more stable as you reach agreement on that price for delivery. So the next couple slides just kind of describe some of so you can think of CMGC, Construction Manager General Contractor, as occurring in two phases, where they act in the pre-construction phase as the construction manager, and then in the construction phase as the general contractor. And so right now, we're in the pre-construction phase, and they're providing a number of engineering type services to help the design teams, both at Caltrans and SBCAG, providing cost estimating. They've developed a schedule. They've looked at the construction for segments 4A, B, and C, and they're developing timelines for that on a realistic construction schedule. They're helping with utility coordination. They're also performing constructability reviews and providing comments to the design teams, and assisting in other ways, with the ultimate goal to identify any risks, either quantify that, mitigate it, or eliminate it.
Excuse me 1 minute. I have a question from Director Hartman.
I just had a comment that when Chair Patino and Director Hart and myself were back in D.C. Describing these projects and the innovations, this was something that got a lot of attention from people at DOT and also from the committee staff we met with. So I don't know how common it is, but we got a lot of attention and interest because we were ahead of the curve with this kind of innovation.
Yeah, we just concluded a Federal Highways training session that was led by FHWA and coordinated by District 5, and there were particular questions. What we did find out is that, it is a growing tool that it's being used for delivery, but there's still some nuances about our project and the 101 that we're still setting trends, and so we're groundbreaking in some ways, but it's a good thing. We're all learning on that. And so this is kind of a general flow chart of the process. So right now, they're providing constructability feedback. They're identifying risks on the construction. They've developed a cost model, from which we'll generate all the negotiated costs. And then ultimately, and the next slide will probably show this a little better, we need to think about this in a different way when we come to costs. And I just present this, and I'll go through this slide in just a second. When we traditionally deliver projects, we put them out to bid, and then a contractor bids it, and we award it to the low bidder. In this process, there's more, think of it more of an alignment process of cost, where you start out with certain assumptions as the owner designer, and those are shown at the top. And the contractor's coming in also with their assumptions, and you're both learning how they're going to do the work, because you have to make certain assumptions, what type of materials they're going to use, where they're going to get those materials, what type of equipment, and you kind of narrow in and get agreement on all that to eliminate those unknowns or risks, and then you narrow that down, and so you see both those lines converging to the end where you have a targeted maximum price, which is the agreed to amount. In the middle, you see, is a separate independent cost estimator that's retained by Caltrans who helps steer that process and provides independence. He's also a construction expert, so he speaks the same language as the contractor, and it helps us narrow and get to refinement and alignment. And then as you see at the bottom, as we're moving through that process, risks are identified from high-level risks to low-level, meaning we're putting to bed a number of the risks as we move through in the cost alignment process. So next steps, and these are the last couple slides. Next steps for segments 4A and C. I mentioned that segment 4C has progressed a little bit faster on an accelerated basis, so you can see that at the bottom that it's scheduled to start construction later in 2020. Segment 4B is still on schedule per the commitment we made to the Transportation Commission in 2021. And we're working through the permitting process on B and C, and then like I mentioned before, we do have our permits in segment 4A. And then I mentioned earlier about work going on in all the different parts of the segment. So now we're rolling into what can we do to ready ourselves for segments 4D and E and getting ready for the next cycle 2 funding opportunities at the state. And so we've been having a number of meetings to refine the scope and the cost of segments 4D and E with county and city staff. And we're at a good point right now that I think we know what those projects are going to be. And we're working through developing starting the funding package and getting that ready. I think later this year, sometime in October, we'll give this board an update on the timeline for that as far as developing funding applications for Cycle 2. But we're working through that process right now, and then we would have to start the design and the permitting phase for those 2 projects as well. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Luna. Any questions of Mr. Luna? None? Okay, thank you very much. Hearing none, let's go on to item number 10, the 1-minute reports. Shall we start with you, Mr. Williams?
Sure. Just I rarely go south of Carpinteria these days.
1 minute.
But last night, because I was meeting with some PUC commissioners, because it's meeting down in Oxnard this week, I had the opportunity to, and the new freeway on-ramp was opened. Must have been in the last week, and you now no longer, it used to be in Carpinteria, basically you needed either an electric car or a sports car to get enough acceleration to get on the freeway, because it was too short on just about anywhere. And finally, we now have some safe entrances, even if you don't own an electric car. So,
thank you. Yes.
Hi, Stuart Kasdan. So, City of Goleta-wise, I'll talk about Goleta rather than me. That wasn't a dig, by the way. I didn't mean it. Okay. Sounded like. So we're in the middle of sort of an intermediate sort of state with a bunch of our things. Cannabis is in between. There's not a resolution on that at this point, and we'll be meeting again for our 10,000th time. And our ordinances, we're reevaluating or redoing our ordinances that were left over from when we were a county jurisdiction. And ADUs, the affordable dwelling units, we sort of resolved our ADU process, but except for the development impact fees, which is significant as either a encouraging people to go forward or discouraging. And so we're figuring out for the ADUs, what are the conditions or what are the circumstances when we'll waive the impact fees. So that's the Goleta news.
Thank you. Director Murillo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The City of Santa Barbara continues to replace bridges along Mission Creek. Thank you to the federal government for their support on that. I did the mayor's bike ride as part of Cycle Mania, and I had a cold, so I really give myself credit for being a trooper on that one. We the city has our Measure C money. It's a 1 cent sales tax in our city borders. And so money's coming in, and we're spending it on street pavement and some bulb outs.
Thank you. Director Adam? Oh, Director Hart.
On June 4th, the Board of Supervisors will consider the county roadmap, looking at all the road paving projects for the next upcoming year, as well as the local road safety program, which is the county's version of Vision Zero. So if folks are interested in those issues, June 4th is the board hearing date.
Thank you. Director Sierra?
Okay, I've got a couple. First of all, Kathy, I too got to do the mayor's bike ride May 1st with Mayor Toussaint in Solvang, and that was, I hadn't been on a bike in years. It was a lot of fun. May 22nd, our city staff and hopefully SBCAG and Supervisor Hartman are meeting on the 22nd, 1:30 in Planning Commission to discuss Highway 246 and how to slow traffic down going through there. What else? There was one other one. Oh, and we also had a little surplus in our budget, so we are adding funds to Riverview Park and hopefully building a pump track along with the electric plug-ins and splash park and possible bocce courts. But the pump track was Michael Becker with his studies for our master bike plan in the valley. That was a hot topic, so Buellton is moving ahead on that one. Thank you.
Director Mosby?
No, pass.
Director Toussaint? Director Hartman?
Well, just the master plan draft for bicycles in the San Ynez Valley and actually multimodal is being presented to the different city councils and to, I think, the county, and then just described, and then it'll be followed up for adoption. And then the last item is happy birthday to Director Adam tomorrow and to former Director Wolf. They share a birthday.
Were you going to sing happy birthday to him, Director Hartman? In Santa Maria, we will be having our rodeo weekend coming up Thursday, May 30th is the mini rodeo. We get all the third graders, I think as far down as Solvang and Buellton, and they fill the stadium there. And these are all kids that are participating in the mini rodeo at 10 o'clock, so everyone is welcome. Santa Maria, we just welcomed A.T. Still, which is a medical school, to Santa Maria, and they will be coming in the fall. That's about it. Executive directors. Oh, I'm sorry. I keep forgetting about Santa Maria. Ms. Rubalcaba.
Sorry I'm not there with you all, but no, nothing to report. Thank you.
Director Clark.
Thank you. I usually take the Peter Adams approach to this, but I don't really have anything to present in a report that is within the purview of SBCAG, except that we like the city of Santa Barbara, we passed a recent sales tax in the amount of a cent and a quarter increase, and we're in addition to using the money to go into our general fund to fund different things that we need to fund, including the library. We also are doing a lot of road repair work out of that money, and that's our streets are in really bad shape, and part of that's due to decrease in gas tax and also countywide priorities to put 101 ahead of everything else. So we're making up that gap with this sales tax as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have Executive Director's Report.
Yes,
Ms. Kern.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. This past month, I have had the pleasure of attending two events that recognized our staff. Sarkis Kacek graduated from the California Academy of Regional Leaders program this past month, and he was on the badge, a regional leadership badge. So I want to congratulate Sarkis on his achievement. And then also this past Saturday, Lori Lariva was identified as the Velo Wings Award recipient from the Santa Barbara Bicycle Coalition for all of her volunteer work. In addition to what she does for SBCAG, she also volunteers on her off hours for the Santa Barbara Bicycle Coalition, and she was honored with that award along with 2 other folks, and including the young woman who organized or helped organize the Dunn School participation in our mayor's ride in Solvang. And I can't remember her name. Do you remember? Aria, a young 8th grader. So congratulations to those folks too. And I don't think Lori's in the audience. No. Okay. I want to thank our board members for hosting May. I think it's a great way to promote bicycling. Director Hart, Parodi, and Director Hart also participated in hosting. You all for participating in Talk. And not least, I want to identify Becca Chanel from Senator Feinstein's office. I just want to find out what we're doing and her. Feel free to anytime. So,
Madam Chair, members of the board, Scott Eads for Gubbins. I'm the Santa Barbara 101 board manager. Okay, a few items. First, I went to our active transportation. District 5 is working fast. We're gathering a lot of information, doing a full inventory of our System 5, and then also doing outreach to events. Locally, we already talked about the Maria Open Streets Festival, which we attended Shumash Earth Day, as well as the seeing a lunchtime event beside the work day. Other news, a couple upcoming grants. Federal Transit Administration has an innovative mobility funding application process that's beginning on 8th. It's still intended to innovative transit opportunities as first connections for transit to travel hubs, mobility for those with limited transportation options for trips. Eligible applicants include state and local DOTs, as well as recognized Native American tribes. Applications are due on August 6th, 250A. And then also want to note that the Coastal Conservation Adaptation Funding Program, again, it's a competitive program that's $2.8 million statewide for very specific climate adaptation strategies. And that can be available for nonprofit organizations, federally recognized tribes, public agencies are also welcome to apply. Applications are due on July 1st. And for either of those, please see me. I've got information on those I can pass on in terms of web links. One thing that Caltrans is currently working on is improving safety within our work zones. And so we're implementing a new safety zone, work zone initiative, where we're focusing on reducing speeds in work zones, allowing more space between the workers and the traffic, and expanding work windows in some cases so that we can be more effective in getting the work done, and also as part of that to reduce the duration of some of these construction projects. So you may see some changes out there as you're driving through work zones, and so just something to keep in mind. In terms of project updates, want to highlight the fact that we just completed the resurfacing project on Highway 1 between 246 in Lompoc and the 101 at Los Cruces. 42 miles in length. It was shop funded through SB1, $15 million in total cost. Cal Portland was a contractor, and it's good to have that one done and totally open to traffic all time. And then a brief update on the 192 bridges. 6 of the 7 are now open. So we just opened up Arroyo Paredon yesterday, so it's fully open to traffic again. So now, at least on the eastern end of the corridor, all those bridges are open. Montecito Creek remains closed. We've actually had some delays in that particular structure due to the fact that we still have some critical work within the creek channel, and with all the wet season that we've had, it's caused some additional delays for us. But we're moving forward on that one. It's looking like we may be pushing into construction open or out into August, potentially even September on that one. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Director Sierra?
I just had one. Thank you. I was reading your list of projects and I was curious about a little over a week ago, plans were dropped off at our city engineers, our contract engineers, M&S, for a one-block redoing of 246 between Lalata Drive and Twin Oaks. They're putting in a raised medium and a left-hand turn. and I was told that it would be happening within about a month. I don't see it in here, and I'm wondering if you have any more information?
I don't. It sounds like it's a minor project, so we don't often include
Right.
those on here, but I'd be happy to follow up and give you some more information.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions? Fair?
I have one, Madam Chair. On Arroyo Paradon, great that it's open, at least for some of my constituents are very happy that it's open. Of course, some of the ones who live right there, maybe not as thrilled. And on their behalf, I just want to ask you, what's the process of the remediation taking place? I mean, obviously, there a lot of work. It looked like a construction site for a long time. Trees removed, that sort of stuff. What's the timing on sort of remediation of the site?
So for most of the structures, work continues in terms of coming back with planting. In some places, we're still finalizing the guardrail systems. There's still some utility relocation stuff that's happening there. Ultimately, we'll be finalizing it with planting, and landscaping is usually the last part of the puzzle. It probably will occur for most of these structures throughout the summer and potentially into the fall.
Well, just because of the scale at Arroyo Paradon, I just urge timeliness with remediation at that particular site.
Thank you. Moving on to communications. Do we have any communications? None? Okay, so I will adjourn the meeting till next Thursday, Thursday, June 20th, 2019, beginning at 10 o'clock in Santa Maria. Thank you.